All right, I think we are live. Hello, everybody. I got my macro set up now. Oh, yeah, we're looking good. How's it going? Check it out. We got things set up. We got, boom, look at that. Pop right in. Oh, isn't that cool? Ain't that the coolest? Yeah, I got some cool lights, more lights, shiny lights, all fun. Sounds good. You should be able to hear me correctly. I didn't mess up the panning like I did last time. So everything should be sounding good. Let's play some tunes. This is what we're looking at today. We are continuing our experiments with the Squarp Pyramid. And for the sake of it, just for fun, I am not using my Eurorack today, which I know is blasphemy to probably most people watching this channel, but you know, it's my channel. I get to have some fun with it. I'm in a good mood. I'm trying something out today. We're using the iPad, which is cool. This thing is freaking awesome. So fun story. Before I started spending way too much money on Eurorack, I wanted to be like, hey, you know, I want to make some music, do some fun stuff. So I bought an iPad and I bought some apps for the iPad and I started playing around with that. And then in the process of doing that is actually when I found a lot of the Eurorack stuff. It's like, oh, there's all these synth things. And it's like, it's, you know, it hit all of my addiction centers in my brain because you get to buy things and build things and oh boy. But the iPad also has a lot of that, except it's all digital. And I think this still counts as DAW-less. I'm sure I will probably get a lot of flack for that and saying that, but I think it's DAW-less. There's no DAW. So I'll talk about what we're doing here and how it works. This is a bunch of smaller apps hosted in a larger app, which is very modular, I would say. And the way it all works is there's this super app, and I say super because it's actually super cool. It is called AUM, which I don't know if it actually stands for anything. It might be like Audio Unit Mixer. So Audio Unit is the format for all of these plugins that you can get on iOS. It's similar to audio units on Mac, though I think they are iOS specific. I don't think there's a direct crossover there. But sorry, it does do some cool things, right? It's basically a plugin format, just like a VST or an audio unit on the Mac for the iPad. And there are host applications that can host audio units, and then there's other, plugins that you can play with. So what we're actually doing here today is we are hosting some plugins and then using the pyramid to sequence the synthesizer plugins in AUM. So when I hit play on the pyramid, what's actually happening is it's sending MIDI over USB to the USB input into the iPad. And I can actually show you how it's routed, which is really cool. This is one of the coolest things about AUM. And I wish there was an actual, and maybe there is if you know this, but if there was something on the freaking Mac that did the same thing in terms of showing how your MIDI was routed and being able to actually just connect squares to map MIDI, that would be amazing. This thing is great. So I have the pyramid MIDI going to my 3 synthesizer voices right now set up on the iPad. And I have them separated out by channel so there's no overlap. So 1, 2, and 10 are the channels I'm using at the moment. 10 is the drum voice. 1 and 2 are bassy voices. That way I can control the sequences on the pyramid and mess with them on the iPad. So let's just hear it one more time. So here's our drums. Here's our first bass voice. And our second bass voice. Whoops, that I broke somehow. There it is. Okay. There we go. That's what I wanted. So I obviously, it's cool. I obviously am still getting a hang of how Pyramid works. So let's talk about that really quick, because I think there's so much depth in this. There's so much depth in this thing. It's pretty bonkers. So notionally, the way Pyramid works is this notion of muting tracks. So there are 64 tracks in Pyramid that can be playing at any given time. And a track consists of things like notes, CC automation, effect, these kind of MIDI effects on Pyramid, MIDI effect automation, and maybe that's it. Euclidean parameters, stuff like that. But each one of those can be... each set of those is considered a track. And each track can be assigned to a MIDI channel, either out the DIN MIDI slots or using USB MIDI, which is what I'm doing in my case. And essentially the way the sequencer works at the basic level is you are muting and unmuting tracks. So let me show you that. So here is my first sequence, which is just one of the bass voices. And if you see on the track view for this sequence, so sequence 1, you can see that all but one of these tracks are muted. So they're not emitting the MIDI notes. Now let me change to a different sequence set. So now you can hear that second bass line came in, right? And then that's because in this case, I have tracks 2 and 3 both unmuted. So they're both emitting MIDI notes to the iPad. So that way the iPad can actually play them. And then finally, I have another one which is now unmuting track 1 and 2, and then switching to a different version of track 3, which is now track 4. So track 3 got muted, track 4 is now playing. Which is weird, it's complicated. There's other ways to do this, but this is just the way I did it for simplicity's sake. So the cool thing is, like, even though I'm in this sequence page, I can modify the mute states on the fly. And then if I want to just kind of recover, assuming I didn't record in the mute states, which this threw me off when I was first doing it. So the same sequence pattern, but now it goes back to its kind of default state with the patterns muted based on how I had set them up originally. Cool. So at a high level, that is essentially how the sequencing works with Pyramid. Now, it gets deeper than that, and that's already really deep. So again, 64 tracks. 64 tracks. That's a lot. That is just a very, very large number of tracks. Each track can have up to 16 patterns. And you can think of a pattern as basically the only thing that can, like, basically everything stays what you want it to be except for what you don't. So you can create a new pattern that has new notes, new automation, new MIDI effect settings, etc. on the same track. So really the only thing that stays the same is what MIDI channel out it's going to, for the most part. And you can, with the sequencer, use the sequence steps to choose which pattern is playing on the underlying track, in addition to the quote unquote mute state of the track. So now all of a sudden, you're basically at Ableton and Ableton levels of complexity without the audio side of things. So no audio. If you guys are not super familiar with the concept of MIDI, MIDI is not audio. All of the sound is being generated by the iPad. The only thing the Pyramid is doing is basically telling the iPad what notes to play, and it's up for the iPad to say, okay, given that, I'm going to use this this synthesizer to play this note, and it's going to sound like this. So in this case, on one of my voices here, and we'll play it again, I'm using this Moog. Everybody's oh man, I'm sure I'm gonna get flack for that. I'm using this Moog synthesizer, and it is actually taking the MIDI note in and translating that to sound, and then playing it out the output. There's no headphone jack on the Pyramid. I can't plug in headphones to the Pyramid. It wouldn't sound like anything. It's just data, which is good from our perspective, because that means I can connect it to just about anything, and I can get cool sounds with whatever I'm connecting to, right? Like, bring your own sound machine. So on one of these, I have this Moog synth. On another, I have a drum kit. So if I were to play this one, and solo it, there's my drum kit. And let me show you, this is one of the things I really like about this hardware sequencer versus other sequencers. There's my drum pattern. I don't know if you guys can see that on the screen. I can have one track with my drum pattern. And if I wanted another drum pattern, there's a couple ways I could do that. Either I could make a separate pattern from Pyramid's perspective on here that has a different actual note pattern to it, or I could create a separate track that's pointing to the same MIDI channel, but that just has different note values. Again, 64 tracks, right? Like, unless I'm sequencing like individual pieces in a full orchestra, the chances of me needing every single track for an individual instrument is really unlikely. So you can, because essentially it's doing all of these kind of MIDI merges before they're going out, I can have multiple tracks sending to the same MIDI channel, and then swap between the two, or even have both. Like, I could theoretically do some sort of fill pattern where one is doing, some subset of beats and another is doing another set, and have all of those be merged together at the end and sent into whatever synth I'm playing. In this case, I have a pattern here for my drums. And if I play this, really, really easy to just punch in notes. And because it uses, depending on the app, and this is where, it's up to you to kind of determine how to do it, but this app in particular uses the same note standard for its drum kit that Ableton does, at least to the best of my knowledge. So theoretically, this pattern is now standard, right? I can replace this drum synth with something else. I could theoretically play it into Ableton or into another synthesizer or another drum kit, assuming it all uses that same C1 is kick and so on and so forth, and goes up from there. The drum pattern will still work the same. And I actually have my Euro rack set up the same way. So when I want to do drums on the Euro rack synth, I have my FH2 on the Euro rack set to be that same style, right? So I have 8 triggers on the Euro rack that are all, C1 and up, by semitone in order to do the same drum triggering. So roughly speaking, I know my kick drum is on, this output of the FH2. If I were to take this pattern and play it into the FH2 and the Euro rack instead of the iPad, I would get drum sounds there too, which is awesome. I love that. theoretically I could do both, right? If I had everything turned on and connected and going into the audio interface, which I do, I just don't have the Euro Rack on, but I could then do a crazy mix of the iPad drums and the Euro Rack drums. I could swap between the two. I would have a different track on here that's basically just a copy of this one, but going to a different MIDI output. That would be crazy, right? Or I could just even duplicate it in the iPad, which is why I love this AUM app. So I could even take this USB MIDI from the Pyramid, and if I had my FH2 powered on connected, it would see it as another output here, and I could just route the same MIDI to there. So channel 10 drums on the FH2, channel 10 drums on this AR909 drum synth. And they would both get the triggers and they would both play. Oh, beautiful. Love it. Sounds awesome. So I am a person who I have mixed feelings about hardware sequencers. This thing is really powerful, and I really like it so far. I mean, it's still early days. I've only had it for a couple days, but oh man, there's some cool things that this does. So what's this big black square over here? It's a touchpad, just like a mouse pad, and it's actually really, decently high res. So let me play this bass line, and I'll show you how I have it set up. So I don't know how well you guys can see that. Let me just, oops. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So I have the MIDI CC from the touchpad for the Y-axis, and I still have a whole other axis I haven't even mapped out yet, but the Y-axis on the Pyramid is mapped to the filter cutoff on this Moog synthesizer. You can hear it and you can see it, and this is like really great. Couple things to note: the Pyramid, it has keys, but they're not velocity sensitive. It's just buttons. So there are other ways to control and modulate note velocity. There's even like a dedicated knob to it. Dedicated in the sense that there is a knob that you can either use for velocity or override things depending on what you're doing. So you can definitely plug in a keyboard into Pyramid and use actual velocity sensitive keys that way. So something like a key step, or really any standard MIDI controller, you can plug into the Pyramid and use that as your note entry if you really care about velocity sensitivity and want something better than just some small buttons to play notes. But rather than a mod wheel, we get this fully assignable touchpad that we can assign to essentially whatever MIDI CC parameter or effect parameter or whatever that we want. And it doesn't even have to be specific. So I set this one to always be this MIDI value, or this MIDI CC. So that way, no matter what I'm doing, I can touch the touchpad. And even if I'm in this view, the second I touch it, I have full control over that CC again. And you can see it, I don't know if you can see that very well, but it leaves it and goes away, right? So if I leave it low, it'll stay low. If I turn it all the way up and leave it, it will stay up. which is great. The other thing that the touchpad is really cool for, and to some extent it works the same way, but without having to map to a specific MIDI CC, I can record live my modulation. So let me show you what that looks like. So here's just what I have right now, which is nothing, right? So in my pattern on this track, I have no CC value stored. So it's all live. If I was modulating this, you know, it's moving on the iPad, that's all live. It's not recorded right now. If I go to live mode and I play, right now it's static because it's not doing anything. If I turn on record, live demos. See, now we're recorded in. I don't know why I wasn't doing that before. I should probably figure that out. But you can see it recorded in the actual motion over time as I was performing with this touchpad. So that means I can like record in cool modulations onto a given track. And there's a couple ways to do that, which I think is neat. So you can record it in. The other part is I can draw it in. So not using the live mode, not recording directly, but holding the record down while I'm in step mode, I can literally draw in my automation just like almost like a touchpad on a computer, right? Like I literally just drew this automation line in. That's awesome. To be able to have that fine-grained of control over what you're trying to do with CC automation is pretty crazy. So like if I wanted to, I could just draw, you know, this very simple that's wonderful, right? Like, so good. My very terrible sine wave with the filter all the way down. Very awesome. The other thing I'm really liking about this so far, the ability to there's a lot of different shortcuts. What I'm trying to say. So like the actual like navigation around the pyramid is actually really fast. And the more I've played with it, the more I've gotten the hang of it, and it very quickly becomes second nature to do a lot of the navigation. If you ever watched Ricky Tinez's video where he's doing anything on like the Digitac or Octatrack, and he's cruising on that thing. That's what I'm hoping I can get to on something like this. Also, Octatrack has mechanical keys, which is, if they were to make this with mechanical keys, since you don't actually, not recording velocity or anything, that would be brilliant. But, maybe someday. Short of that, the fact that the buttons are, they're pretty nice to press. I mean, they are that kind of squishy button. They do have a nice click to them. You guys probably can't hear that, but so you definitely know when they're pressed, which is nice. And the combos, after a certain point, they do feel kind of second nature, which is cool. So all that is to say, like, once you get used to the workflow, navigating around this becomes really quick, and you can kind of hot jump to various things in order to change various parameters without having to like go into the sequence mode, go into the track mode, right? If I wanted to change the MIDI value in the step mode, I can do that and hit MIDI and then turn the corresponding knob to do that, which is awesome. Cool. Where are we at? What time is it? I didn't want to go too long tonight because it's already pretty late for me. We've been going about a half an hour. So I think that's kind of where I'm going to leave it for today. This thing is crazy. I know if you watch my first stream at all, I was pretty like scratching my head against it. A lot of manual looking up and reading. Now that I've actually read the manual, also always read the manual. Don't be like me. I'm really starting to get the hang of the actual workflow and understanding the various paradigms of it and how it works and what it does and what it doesn't do, which is important. The whole concept of like muting a track versus changing to a different pattern or something like that is very different, I think. If you actually look, let me show this maybe. Let's go to a track. Right, so this one doesn't have the drums playing, which is our track 1. So if I go to track view, you can actually see, maybe you can see it or not. It's actually under the hood. It's going through the pattern for track 1 and playing it, air quotes, without actually like emitting the MIDI messages. So everything is still in lockstep, if that makes sense. It's just doing everything short of actually sending the MIDI note out the cable. Versus like, it's not, the track 1 is not paused, it's muted. And I think that's an important difference to understand in how they use that here, where muting a track basically means that the track is still playing in the background, but nothing is coming out of it. So from a timing perspective, it gets really interesting with things like polyrhythms, where you can have tracks of different lengths and they become out of sync with each other intentionally. And because they're always playing in the background, even if they're not actually emitting the notes, when you unmute the track, it does interesting things and it sounds differently. So it's not always going to pick off right at, beat 1 of the given sequence step. It's going to sound a little bit different, which is just something to keep in mind. So if every track is not in 4/4, you're going to get some interesting decisions to make, for lack of a better word. So. Right, so like on this track, for example, everything is playing, but only the drums is actually being unmuted. And I can change the mute state, which is cool too. So if I wanted to record, in order to save the mute state, you have to have the record on. So this is why I was struggling the other day. I was getting really frustrated with this, but it makes sense, right? If you wanted to, on this pattern, do some live stuff and only have these come in, but then jump back to where you were, right? I didn't save the mute state there. And that's by design the way they built it. So now if I wanted to save the mute state, I'd hit record and say, okay, unmute these 2 tracks. And now when I go to, re-trigger this step of the sequence, it remembered my mute states as being changed, so it's going to keep playing those. And if I want to undo that, hit record again, unmute those. Cool. So I know that was quick today. I wasn't really planning to stream anyway, but I figured I would hop on because I had everything set up and I was having fun, and I just wanted to share what I learned. So hopefully you guys learned something about this, either about the iPad or the Squarp Pyramid, and something maybe sparked your interest. If you do have questions, feel free to drop me a message in the comments. Like and subscribe, blah, 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 blah. You guys know the deal. Not going to bore you with that. Yeah, this is fun. I like this setup with the iPad and the pyramid. This is really cool. This is modular synth, maybe. Call it a modular synth, right? Like you got, if it looks kind of modular to me, I can do plugins and effects and all that fun stuff, right? Like it's not quite the same as Eurorack, obviously, but there's a lot of sound design potential within the iPad, which is really cool. So like Eurorack on the go, right? Like there's literally there's an app called MeRack that is literally Eurorack on the go, which is awesome. But even just with the multitude of plugins and synths and drum kits and stuff that are on the iPad already, there's so much that you can do just with that. Being able to use the actual hardware sequencer with it is really cool too. And there are other apps that can do it, but AUM in particular makes that process really, really painless, which is fun. So cool. Thank you guys. Stay tuned. Planning to do a whole bunch of more stuff. Next week in particular, I think we'll be busy, lots of streaming. And then January is coming up, and I'm going to be trying to stream at least once a day, maybe. It might be smaller things like this, depending on what I have time for. But just trying to put a whole bunch of stuff out there because why not? And it's fun. Cool. So thank you guys. See you later. Bye.